have about an hour and a half to refine the discussion from yesterday. I think all of you saw the written summary, which was passed out in the plenary session. And the way we'll proceed this morning is have the moderators of each of our three groups yesterday give a quick summary of their impressions of the discussion, and also mention any changes that they think need to be made to the written report. And then we'll, in each case, we'll open it up to those of you who were in the audience or participating in these groups to add ideas. The product of this is that in our final session, I am supposed to summarize all three groups as my part of the summary of summaries, and to make changes to this written report. If I could characterize the degree of unanimity that we reached yesterday, I'd say that the more specific the discussion, the more we were able to agree. The more general the discussion, the more we were all over the place. So on the Olympics, a very specific goal, a very specific objective, some good historical examples. I think we came quite close to a consensus on what needed to be done. When it came to war, peace, and espionage, we came up with a pretty good set of what we think norms ought to be. When it came to regulation, we were all over the place, and we didn't really reach a consensus. So I'm going to try to spend the most time on the regulation discussion, since I think that I feel at least satisfied that in that discussion we really achieved a consensus of a way forward. And if we can't achieve some sort of consensus on a way forward in this group, we know what the politicians will do with it. So we want to look a little bit harder at that. So we're going to start with the Olympics, then go to war, espionage, and deterrence, and then we're going to finish, hopefully spending most of the time on regulation. Jim Foster had to leave to attend another conference, so Jim Takei has stepped in as the representative of that group. So Phil, if you would start us off by summarizing and then telling us what you think we need to do to change the written report.
Okay, great. So overall, we had quite a bit of agreement that at a high level, the key characteristics that have to take attention to are the risk assessment and impact analysis, and getting started on that right away, but continuously iterating that as you move along, because changes will come up, new technologies come in, new threats present themselves, and so you're just constantly updating that and allowing yourself to roll with the punches is a good way to say it. Secondly, a lot of focus was on governance, right? Because you have to coordinate across the public-private sector, within the public sector, so across ministries, across cabinets, from the federal level down to the regional and local level, so the police coordinating with the national level police, etc. That all has to happen. But additionally, governance includes international cooperation. So there was a bit of a focus on how do you have the international players that have a stake in the success of this large-scale event to be able to bring those people into the discussion as well, to share information, resources, CERT cooperation, CSIRT cooperation, etc. So reaching those kind of agreements is also another critical factor. And then finally, get started early, iterate, but practice. So everything about security, both physical and cybersecurity, is making sure that it's almost a rote memory characterization of how you deal with it. What is the incident response? You should know right away. Who's the go-to person? You should know right away. The characterization around governance directly reflects into this, because if you don't know the people, if you're not used to talking to them, if you don't know who the go-to person is, who to call, who makes the decision, you're going to have conflict, internal and external, and it's going to also delay your incident response, especially if you're dealing with something that could be country level embarrassment. You can't delay. You have to know exactly who you're going to talk to right away. If it's potentially a country level threat, that's already some kind of level threat, whether it's cyber or physical, you can't delay. You have to know exactly the chain of command, who's responsible, who do you talk to, who has responsibility for different sectors of the environment. So those three main focuses, I think, are fairly well captured in the summary report. We need to expand upon that and make sure that it's reflected appropriately. The areas that I think we can add a little bit, there are concepts that we need to consider. How do you do, and again, this is William Sedgwick's asked, how do you do the threat? So how do you do the cyber coordination? How do you do the threat coordination? How do you do vulnerability coordination? What's the threat intelligence feeds, and how do you get those into a pattern and a format that you can immediately take action on, right? So that you're not only doing post-incident response, you're doing what I call predictive incident response, right? Where predictive incident response is actually putting together the capabilities and handle the capabilities based on the predictive threat intelligence that's coming in. So you now have new information that says if this actor might want to do this type of thing based on these reasons using these tools, very, very quickly you can set up defenses against that. So that, in fact, for the London Olympics, we did precisely that. We had threat monitoring that told us when DDoS attacks were going to come. So at the time, it sounds like tiny little stuff now, 11,000 events per second. Wow, that's nothing. But in 2012, that was actually fairly characteristically big. And to be able to mitigate that and be prepared for that took a fair amount of planning and the ability to have that threat intelligence that said, you really are going to be attacked and here's where it's going to come from. There's also a number of things that you get a threat intelligence feed that isn't always correct, but you have to vet it all the way through. So during the opening ceremonies for the London Olympics, and this is called information, so I can talk about it, there was a threat against EDF, the power provider, right? And it was both a cyber and physical terrorist threat together. And it got vetted through the GCHQ, Home Office, Scotland Yard, and everybody said this is a credible threat. And so we took incident response immediately for it. We deployed 300 power engineers to put out emergency generator sets. We deployed expert security personnel to go out and do the threat protection, et cetera. The threat never developed. What we don't know is, did our predictive security posture, actually block that or not, right? So that they didn't even try. There's all kinds of questions around, what's the reaction to what you put in place. But if you do look like you are on a firmer footing, that can actually reduce the threat right there. Because these guys are intelligent. They're watching what you're doing, both on the cyber front and the physical security front.
So let me ask Phil, when in London, and maybe we have Steve here in Australia, when you ran these exercises, did you have role-playing red teams to both people and algorithms that were part of your exercise as a real-life threat? Did you actually handle that? It was more than just talking it through?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the beginning, you do a tabletop simulation. Right. So you're just being prepared based on the technical design that you put together. But as you get closer and closer to the games, not only do you run your own internal tests. The IOC has two what they call technical rehearsals, where they'll actually do their own red teaming, right? So you don't know who's the red team people, they keep that secret, and they go in and they attack you in various ways.
And you bring role-playing hooligans in to okay. Same thing in Australia, Steve?
Yeah, everyone, same thing, and we also do things.
Thanks, Abel. We also do things like take out 4 or 5 of the key decision makers, just because you can't always rely on everyone that needs to be there will be there. So there's another dimension to this.
So these are serious, almost military style exercises that would be in.
I'd like to think I do that.
Yeah, good. Okay, let's see, who else do we have? Steve is here. Mark is not with us. Reinhard, are you with us this morning? Okay. And June, anything to add on the Olympic side?
I attended that session as the future host of the 2020, and from the Japanese government and Japanese people's point of view, how can we leverage the event, make the environment, make the digital infrastructure better than ever and safer? That is our interest, and how can we link all the efforts and measures to the future society? That is our key point.
Yeah, I thought the general agreement on that point as well is bringing people who've done it before, right? You have to bring in the experience and capabilities because Steve listed the 5 groups, half of their state-sponsored or less by subsidized terrorists. And you have to be able to deal with all of them, and how they were prepared before, but also how you want to get ready for the future.
I think one weakness we had in our group was we didn't have any current members of the Japanese Olympic team to defend themselves. There was one young man who was sitting over here who was asking about threat mechanics and standards. But so I think as far as the how-to, we need to talk with William about how we get these to the right people who will have the responsibility for the next 5. Oh, we do. Okay, there we go. So but I think that's our charge. Is really to. Yeah, let's talk to somebody who's going to have to eat the sandwich here. Did you find the session on the Olympics was helpful?
Yeah, exactly. But even though, as I told you yesterday, so I still struggle with a kind of methodology to identify the whole risk architecture. The possible risks could exist or including social infrastructure, particularly in the IoT era. We have no idea. We have no single expert to cover all these different areas. So that is the most challenging that we need to settle for the coming years.
Yeah, and one of the things that we tried to talk about is, like we said, there might be a very cultural difference, right? Because the Japan culture is plan, get it right, and then execute. But for an event like this, you need to plan less and execute more, and iterate on that. So taking what you know now, do the risk assessment. But as you learn more, you continue to update and modify that risk assessment. And so it's an iterative methodology that maybe culturally not as acceptable, but again, that's why you bring in the experience from other people.
Yeah. Actually, the 5 years is too short to change the country.
Well, I thought it was a good session. The only other observation I have before turning to the audience is that I know what a chain of command is, and it's clear that what you have in the Olympics is not a chain of command. I mean, you don't have directive authority to order somebody to do something if it is from the CERT of another country. However, there's a unity of purpose, it seems, in these Olympic teams that form from all the countries, which operates just as well as a traditional chain of command, because everybody wants to succeed, everybody wants to help as much as they can, and that really is a powerful, I think, force which can take the place of a directive chain of command, which is how we normally handle these things. Let me see if there are any comments from those of you who weren't on the stage, or are you satisfied with the report? Yeah, sure.
Sure. So I'm Mike Smith from Okinawa. We do a lot of things at the Olympics. Two things that we've started doing. One is we do a lot of DDoS testing with our customers, specifically to prove that their configuration actually works. That fits into a lot of other rehearsal cycles. Also, I work a lot with Rio 2016, and one of the things that's an advantage for Rio is that they had the World Cup in 2014, and they're having the Summer Olympics in 2016. They viewed the World Cup as a rehearsal, okay, specific to Japan, and I haven't heard anybody, I've heard a couple side conversations on this. But you have the Rugby World Cup coming up in 2019. That's a phenomenal opportunity to do a dress rehearsal, even though it's different groups, but a lot of the people can cross over, learn from the Rugby World Cup as a smaller event, and take those lessons learned into 2020.
No, those are both excellent points, Chris.
You know, I thought what London did in terms of creating a physical joint, not simply do some planning with some various foreign partners, but create a physical joint at the Olympics, had a profound impact. You did that, the Russians did not do that at Sochi. It was much harder for the United States to actually make contributions to the security of that proposition. So a statement was made yesterday, which is that Japan will host the Olympics, but the responsibility to make for a safe and secure Olympics is a shared proposition. That physical joint is going to be important because it'll do three things. One, it'll aid that understanding. Things that don't make sense because you're not in the stovepipe where this shard of information makes sense compared to another, will because there'll be a physical joint. Two, you'll actually in real time be able to leverage the strengths of all those partners. But the knock-on effect is that back home in all those other places, there's probably a support function that in real time is thinking about your problem as if it's their problem, because it is.
Yeah, that's good. The importance of the combination of person-to-person contact with digital backup is, I think, the way, rather than thinking you can do it all over VTCs. Any other thing on this? Oh, sorry.
John, for me, I was not a part of the panel, but I heard what was said, and what I'm missing in this paper is that there's a huge mention about the governance, the need for coordination and collaboration with all the entities that are engaged in the work with planning and for the Olympics, and also to mitigate the attacks that may be coming. But maybe I haven't read it good enough, but do you have a point of view on that? Thanks.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the very beginning, governance was one of the key topics, right? In the summary, it mentions governance, but it tells a little bit of a story around it as opposed to saying that is specifically. So when the white paper comes out, we'll definitely.
Yeah, let's beef that up. Good catch. Good catch. Yeah. Yes,
Thanks. Just on that point, I think three things that are probably in their interest, but could be more explicit, is the governance, is that this is the Olympics, but it's not just a big stadium, it's everything that sits outside of it. If you can't get people to the games, it's no good. And to not think of physical security as separate to everything else we talked about, because that is to me our continuum, and it's hand in hand. We found we could get visual access to premises to then get real access to systems, and you can't have it in separate state.
Quick follow-on to that, certainly in London, but I think our experience in talking to people from Vancouver, etc., there is a huge threat risk that raises for the entire country. So there was many more attacks on the financial services, there was many more attacks on things like the MOD that weren't part of the Olympics at all, right? But because the whole profile of the country comes up, then the attacks start happening. We also had a very, very interesting one that one of the top sponsors, Apple's Origin, we thought was being attacked because they were involved with the Olympics. But it turned out that they were being attacked during the Olympics, but because they took a contract with the DWP, the Department of Welfare, for redoing the welfare program, it was going to actually lower people's benefits. And so they were actually being attacked for a completely separate reason, but it wasn't until we did the investigation that said this was the attackers and this was the tools that they were using and why they did it, that we figured out that it wasn't social economics at all. So there was a lot of confusion during that time.
Right. Okay, I'm going to cut it off there unless somebody has a two-finger. Anything burning? Oh, yes, sir. Right.
Just briefly, I'm Nake Rizal from Japan, and well, I'm supporting this discussion for everybody is responsible for what is happening in the Olympic Games. And just to notify and highlight that the OECD has just revised their security guidelines in this year. In October 1st, they want to just disclose all the sentences. And here, they say that various things that all participants are responsible for security and information systems and networks. So it means that OECD is just recommending that the same things in this the discussions will just happen here. So the all participants includes individual users, not only the industries. So
Right.
maybe it's a very good reference for
Right.
support our discussion.
But the other side, which is if everybody is responsible for something, nobody is responsible for something. So I think that's what governance is about, is taking that principle and turning it into specific things. Great. Okay, we're going to move on to the cyber and national security. Again, I think that we were able to come up in this session with a set of principles that we're happy to present to the great nations of the world, and if they just are smart enough to listen to us, we can have a more peaceful place. So, Ben, go ahead.
So this panel was structured a little differently than the others, in that Admiral Barrett made an opening statement. And so based on that, plus some input from other areas, we had structured the panel around three key questions. And the first was, cyber attacks are not like weapons of mass destruction. How can concepts from traditional international law like proportionality, or how can an approach like deterrence be applied to cyber realm? Then the second was, if cyber espionage is different than sort of regular espionage because of its scope and its consequences, what about the chance for miscalculation in the cyber age, and what can you do to reduce them through building common understanding? The final question was, how can you take temporary, sensitive, very high visibility events like the Olympics, and particularly focus on public-private cooperation and information sharing for degrees of protection? So with that as background, the group, I think, came up with several things. One was in terms of norms. There may be norms built around things like the protection, the keeping non-state actors, keeping criminals, keeping terrorists from engaging in malicious cyber activity, that even great powers who disagree on a number of things could agree on in this case. You find a common understanding that certain types of behaviors, especially by non-state actors, are not appropriate. Another potential norm is that there would be certain infrastructure, say, that are such consequence to a nation that they should be taken off the table. And this could be things like nuclear power plants, this could be things like hospital grids, that kind of thing. So what should be there? With regard to international law, could you then take those sort of principles off the table and apply them within the normal constructs of international law without having to change the international law? And the sense we probably could. I think another point was the importance of resilience. So as you design your systems and the advanced preparation that was talked about in terms of London and others, it's really important to build resilience into your systems. The expectation is not that you won't get attacked. The expectation is not that some malicious activity will not get inside your firewalls. The question is, how do you design your system to minimize the amount of time you're down and the damage that it does? From a Navy background, or I think in terms of a ship, you never imagine that water is not going to get inside the hull And so that's why you work with watertight departments and pumps and fire mains, like you train. Which sort of leads to the next piece, which is that this is never just about technology. It's about the intersection of people and organizations and processes and technology, phrase something different sometimes. But, and you need to weave those together going forward. There was a lot of talk about public-private goals. For example, should private sector be authorized the right of hackback or the ability to take action on their own to engage in kind of preemptive or cyber attacks. The group, I think, was fairly strong that would lead to complete chaos, and there needs to be some sort of a norms around that. The idea of letters of marque and reprisal was raised and kind of downplayed as a viable option in the space. But I think this is an area where work needs to be done. So what are the right balance between public and private activities in terms of providing defense in an area where most of the innovation and investment is in the private sector, but most of the societal authorities for the use of deadly or equivalent force in cyberspace are held by governments. With regard to exercises, point out for the Olympics, exercise was seen as very important and ongoing. One of the things that comes of this is cybersecurity is never a destination. You're never going to get there, cross the goal line, and spike the ball. It's going to be a journey, so you need to keep training and evolving and bringing in new approaches and introducing people to exercises. In the area of espionage, the establishment of fora for where people with fundamentally different views, like those who view the internet as a place where content should be controlled versus those who view it where it should be largely free and open space, there need to be established fora where those disagreements can be aired. Right now we have some. It's not clear whether you need others. The government, the progress made by people, governmental experts were cited as areas where, even though it may be slow, those with fundamental differences nonetheless will make progress. With regard to technology, the idea of starting with something that's good enough and then evolving the iterative approach you pointed out, I think was reiterated for us also. You're never going to get to the perfect solution, but rather than waiting for that perfect solution, start with something that would be okay and then just continue to make it better as you go along. So I think some areas that we need to work on more. For me, I came away quite troubled by the applicability of terms like security and privacy. And I think just like, say, law, it's certainly an applicable term, but just like you have corporate lawyers and trial lawyers and divorce lawyers and whatever, there needs to be greater gradation. But that's made an interesting analogy to the number of Eskimo words for snow, the number of Hawaiian words for lava. And so I don't know how you introduce it. It's not just privacy, because there's generational differences in privacy. Younger people are typically more willing to share information. Information you're willing to share about yourself on Facebook. You accept a different privacy standard than your financial records or your medical records. So how do we incorporate that radiation into the discussion? The same thing with security. We talked about those existential threats like major command and control reconnaissance systems, which you would never want to hook up to an IP-based system, versus those that you use for daily operations. So how do you draw that kind of distinction? Just a couple more points. Civil liability, I think, was something that was cited several times, but the role of the insurance business in monetizing the risk and monetizing how much money people are willing to have to pay for some level of mitigating that risk has got to be factored more into the planning in the future. And then it's been addressed elsewhere in education. By and large, I think the decision makers often do not understand these issues. And how are there ways that you can educate not only the decision makers, because the political decision makers turn over fairly quickly, but their staffs.
All right, thanks very much, Lynn. It looks like we have several members of that panel here. So, Miroslav, you've read the report, you heard Lynn. Anything we missed here?
I think Mr. Wars summarized very well what we were discussing, so just maybe again I would like to emphasize that the call for practical approach to all these things, because there is of course around great ideas which we share, but always, in my opinion, we should make the final statement about some practical thing which is actionable, what I tried to say a few times during my report during the session. So that's probably the most important, and everything was covered by the report. So.
Thank you. Let's see. General Tanaka, the comments guy. We get another microphone over here, please.
Thank you very much. I'm satisfied with the summary. I want to add one thing. For the Tokyo Olympic Games, we have to have some seamless operation system inside our government. So, because the indicator for the cyber attack, we cannot find out it's a cyber crime indicator or cyber terrorism indicator, or it's a trigger for the cyber conflict, something like that. And also that we have to think about the escalation, how to control the escalation process. Such kind of thing that we have to think, we have to organize from the cyber crime side to the cyber conflict side. Already know we are, every country has a stovepipe system in the government, so we have to overcome that such kind of misunderstanding.
Actually, if I could just build on the general point, we've been clearly in several sidebar discussions, but, and this goes back to governance, is very often the police, who have an obviously very important role here, are really, I gather in Japan, empowered to act after the fact, not in anticipation. And so you have this issue of how can you apply intelligence, what can people do before a crime is committed, before the boundaries of law are crossed, and that's an issue that hasn't been sorted out in these days.
I mean, General Tanaka raises such an interesting point. We just talked about the Olympics, where everybody is up on their tiptoes, in their command center, doing exercises, working on threats, and then that's over. Let's go back to the old way of doing business. Stovepipes, budgets, publicity. I mean, why can't we bottle the energy and the processes that we have in a big event like the Olympics and make that the norm for how we operate all the time? I mean, it drives me crazy. We see it everywhere. So, yeah. Let's see. Is Dr. Park here? Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, I think the summary is okay to me, but I'd like to point to the remark by the moderator on privacy and security. I think everything is not absolute these days. That is, the privacy cannot be absolute. So I think we should make some kind of limit to privacy, even by another newly emerging human rights, such as right to be forgotten. But also, it could be limited by the security. We should live safe.
Very good point. Thank you. Chris English?
Yeah, so I thought Lynn gave an excellent summary. I wish they'd been in the conversation. Well done. I'd emphasize 3 points inside of that. One, while we've characterized this through the lens of cyber war, cyber defense is the other side of that coin, and we're more likely to engender a commitment to collaboration. If we think about cyber defense as job one, right? I mean, that's the high moral ground, both between private sector and public sector, and between governments plural. I think in that context, surveillance also takes on a different role, that surveillance may in fact aid the bad, right? A stronger defense, proactive defense, and anticipatory defense as opposed to being seen as a precursor to war. Lynn, I think thoughtfully added in the discussion of fora. I think that pressure relief valves are really important, especially between potential adversaries. Back in the early 60s when they came out with a hot phone between the Soviet Union and the United States. I'm not sure if it was ever used, but you knew that in the heat of the moment there was a great misunderstanding and the opportunity for escalation that neither side wanted. There was a relief valve that you could at that point push. And then three, the element that was sometimes in the room, sometimes out of the room, necessarily so. There's a tension between the private sector and the government with respect to what are seen as differing objectives. They're really not differing objectives. They're just motivated by slightly different variants. The exercises that we proposed, I think, will go a long way to informing each side about not just the modalities, but the objectives of the other. And I think we'll find that we get more common ground than we know. And the relationships that come from that will help us solve a lot of other problems, not just this one.
So let me see if there are other comments from those of you who weren't in the line. Sir.
I believe the only comments you...
and you are?
Oh, I'm from Marsh, Uraga, the insurance brokers and the risk management consulting firm. Thanks to Mr. Wells, you mentioned the insurance, and I believe that there's not so many people here gathering from the financial sector of the insurance industry. The things I like to comment like yesterday is that, well, just in case, the security itself is very much well done, but there is no word of the 100% of perfect. Just in case, if the cases occur, there's a huge financial impact to many of the industry, including the government or whatever. And that's why the risk finance is set up. If we talk about the risk management, that's the wheel of the two wheels of the risk control and risk finance. We talk a lot about the governance. We talk about a lot about the training. Everything is all included under the segment of the risk control. However, risk finance, there is no discussion, no discussion, but not many discussions about it. And we need to think or make some regards about the risk financing, not only insurance, but any of the hedging tools to think about that. And as I mentioned yesterday, the capacity in the world is over $1 billion or $10 billion for the capacity. But once the capacity for the coverage is not sufficient, then the government will make some support for the reinsurance or whatever the schemes are. So that's another step to think furthermore. You mentioned about the calculation for the impact of the entire risk itself worldwide. We never know that. But just in case, if that is the case, then the government will support from the reinsurance or the wholesale business. That's what I want to add as my comment. And the finance is one tool to support just in case. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. I thought the concept of insurance was a very important one that was raised in several discussions. I'm not sure we all understand it, but it plays a part, I think, in what we're doing. Let's see, Yamaguchi.
Thank you very much, Yamaguchi Foundation. I was highly inspired by this session, and particularly by the keynote speech by Okinawa. And let me get back to the high end of cyber drug issues, cyber war. And I missed a chance to raise issues. Let me make just 2 points. One is number one, we may have to think about non-state actors, of course. In addition to bad guys, we may have to think of responsible non-state actors like Microsoft. Microsoft may be much stronger than some of the nation states in terms of cyber defense, cyber security. So those responsible actors in cyberspace may form alliance to match the bad guys. That is one point that I want to make. Another point is that I was inspired by General Tanaka's comment on arms control in cyberspace. And that reminds me what we did during the Cold War in space. In space, both Soviet Union and the United States was so refrained from doing offensive thing against China. I found another similarity with cyberspace. In outer space, it's not terribly difficult to attack satellites, like we witnessed in 2007 when Chinese tested their anti-satellite weapons against their own satellite and caused thousands of dead leads. Even Chinese satellite was once in danger of those dead leads. So now we know the space is a place where we not easy to attack and very difficult to defend. The cyberspace is similar. We know it is fairly difficult to defend. While attacking is easy, the attackers can easily attack the very big state or enterprises. So kind of moratorium or the norms building, not attacking, causing a sort of catastrophic effect. That sort of new norm should be solved.
Thank you, Nobuo. Any other comments on the warranties? Oh, sir.
Thank you very much. Okay. My name is Tom Koyama from the Japanese private sector. I really appreciated this excellent summary, and I tend to have some constructive comment on this part of how firms have a right to self-defense. I have two reasons to point out this issue. First of all, in Japan, for the IT company, including telecom operator and ISP, have a problem. When hacked or attacked from the outside of a cyber criminal, we have to collect information and tracing. However, there are some other regulations to make obstacle of this issue. For example, privacy protection or secrecy of communication. But both of them are based on the basic right of human relations, human rights. So we have to have a discussion in this point. And of course, not only for the IT sector and telecom operator, but also as a critical infrastructure company, like financial services and, for example, aircraft or some railway companies, they should have some right to self-protect. However, the context of the substance of the right of self-defense is not clear. So we should have much more discussion with Japanese private sector and sometimes with the government officials for the further discussion. I hope some expert in KW or some Japanese organization have a discussion on this point and welcome to join. Thank you very much.
That's a very good point. I wasn't aware of that difference. I'd also like to, one thing that I really took out of the session, I think was from Dr. Park, who mentioned that we don't do ourselves a good service in our cyber discussions by taking the extreme, the most difficult, the most blood-chilling examples and trying to form policy on those. So I think we should coin a new term called cyber hysteria, which means that the world, that one hacker on one keyboard can turn off the lights of the entire world, and we need to work on it. But I think that was a very good point here, that we need to operate in the middle here, being aware of some of the extremes, but not let them drive our policy in counterproductive ways. Well, great. I think we've got some good time then to turn to the final session on the regulatory paradigm, because I think we didn't really have time yesterday to finish that discussion. So I'm going to ask Jim Takei, who is standing in for Jim Foster, to summarize. You all have read the report of the session. We have many of the members present here, so I think we have time for some new ideas and some rethinking of this panel for the next 40 minutes. So, Jim?
Thank you, Andrew. let me share how we discussed yesterday, and the summary of the discussion, it can be this memo, and this memo has already captured a major part of our discussion. So let me share how I see that discussion and how I learn from that discussion. So yesterday, we have a variety of the speakers in the third session, and from Europe, Japan, US, and Korea, right? So in that discussion, we see a lot of difference between the perspective or understanding of or the needs for the regulation. So even though if we say regulation, what is the objective of the regulation? That is sometimes different. So for my understanding, regulation is as a government to show the direction for the future or to show the society. We need to go this direction, like the safety right. So to do that, there's a two ways to set the regulation. One way is you cannot do that. If you do this, you may be punished. Or maybe independently we use to regulate that action measure for the use the word regulation that just show the direction. That is kind of guideline. And this is the best way you go for the future, or you to avoid the risk or action. So in the ICT regulation discussion, we need to distinguish these two different ways, two different paths. And also, the target, if we don't define or agree the target of the regulation in that discussion, sometimes that discussion may go cross. So are we discussing about how to protect the nation by the regulation, or how to build a safer infrastructure by that regulation, or are we discussing about the regulation to protect the consumer? All the regulation may be very different. And what we learned yesterday from yesterday's discussion, I found very, very interesting point. That is, there's big difference for the expectation of the government role in each region or each country. Maybe US and Japan different, quite different, and EU we see different. That is the cause of the privacy discussion, privacy regulation discussion between the US and the EU, and also now Japanese government is catching up that privacy regulation discussion, so that in the past, I was involved in a privacy discussion, and I learned that privacy, that itself, is really highly related to culture. So what we discussed, we talked with the government, that is, we need to implement some cultural difference into the regulation. So that is the basic understanding that in the cybersecurity discussion, we see same thing. That is aha point yesterday for me. So that is one interesting point, and Jim, I think he intentionally picked that extremely case in the discussion yesterday, and he wanted to show the difference of each country's regulation and how to harmonize that regulation. That is, I think he wants to put on the table by this audience what we can do, what we should do. And frankly speaking, I attended several international and global discussion with regulation with cyberspace discussion. But every time I attend that meeting, I feel that all the audience agree that ICT infrastructure, global digital infrastructure, that is the basic foundation of the future society, future growth, economic growth. But how to implement that regulation, or how to implement what we need to do, then it is very difficult to agree on each of this stuff, each country. So that is what we have seen, let's say, last 5 years. So now I'd like to bring something new from this group, that is what we can agree
based on the concept or the understanding of what we want to protect, what we see the value of digital infrastructure. The value of the digital infrastructure, that is what I said, the future, the foundation of the future society, better for the next future. That infrastructure can bring something new by innovation. And in the yesterday's discussion, some people say some regulation, maybe some types of regulation that reduce the activity of innovative idea for innovation. So for the government, I would like to ask for each government, if you implement some regulation, you should think about what kind of innovation may be affected by that regulation. And from the private sector point of view, especially IT has been not regulated tightly compared with the telecommunication infrastructure and telecommunication. That is the reason why we could see very rapid advancement of the technology and use case. So how to achieve that benefit and how to share that benefit with another society, I think that is a big challenge for us. And I'm not saying that regulation is bad, but I agree, in some cases, in certain areas, we really need the regulation. And one of the examples, good example is Japanese government cybersecurity regulation, cybersecurity guideline. They try to show the direction, and they put some punishment and candy and how do you call it? Candy and
Ready to translate, Tony?
so
Penalties?
Yeah, penalties. So in Japan, then we say sometimes we give candy and sometimes we give penalty. We give penalty. So I think this Japanese government cybersecurity regulation is giving just the direction, not aiming to punish people. So that is the interesting point. And we see similarity in this cybersecurity framework. So that is one of the directions we see these days. And if we hear regulation, that is something we may be punished, but in IT sector, we see regulation that shows the direction of the future, direction of the innovation. So I like to keep that discussion among the audience and speakers. How can we have the right regulation in the country, in the region, and in the international?
That's great, June. I didn't think we didn't get to that discussion yesterday. Let me get a couple of other ideas on the table, and then we can open it up. Harry Raggy, we didn't really get a chance to talk yesterday about this whole dilemma that international companies are in about data breaches leading to liability suits and the great the turmoil that's going on in at least the United States on how do you handle all of this standards. Maybe you could bring that problem to us.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Harry Radke from Deloitte. I think we can learn some things here that we're currently going through in the United States on some of our legislation that has been proposed now on Capitol Hill. And it seems like 6 or 7 years, some of this has been going on. We have something called the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, CISA. It was just, in fact, approved by our United States Senate, and so our process now is to send it over to the House of Representatives to see if they're going to modify, which they will modify it. But I think two of the main points of contention in this, one of which has been privacy, and we spent a lot of time yesterday in our panel on security versus privacy, a lot of time. But we never did get to the point of the other big part of contention, tension right now, and that is what the Admiral alluded to, is the liability to industry that they are very concerned about in sharing information, putting it forward, and then somehow being held responsible for that information that puts them in jeopardy to lawsuits. And so as I read through our paragraph here, I did a word search. I didn't do it electronically, but I did it with my eyes. I don't see the word liability at all. And so since that has been such a huge problem and discussion point in the United States for years now, still is not settled, I think we need to address, at least consider addressing liability. And in a related area, we've all talked about cyber insurance. And so cyber insurance is related to those liabilities because organizations are trying to mitigate the risk that they have through purchasing liability insurance. Now, I met with about 8 large insurance companies about, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago. They were starting to think about cyber insurance at that time, but none of them were really offering it because they didn't know exactly how to offer it. Most insurance companies have models. They insure assets that have a value, and the value is expected to either go up or down with time. What's cyber worth? And so even some of our initial discussion on our first, yesterday during our I think Rob Beckstrom mentioned that now there's insurance policies that are available out there, $300 to $500 million worth of coverage. But there's lots of work now that needs to be done on pricing of the risk that is being developed. Insurance companies are seeing a real opportunity. And I know now of at least 60 insurance companies that are offering cyber liability insurance. So this is a real growth. The other interesting connection point here is that without having models being developed already in the insurance community, they are relying on the cybersecurity framework to do some initial assessments on the companies that are asking for liability insurance to get some sort of an idea of where they are. And I think yesterday during our session in here, I mentioned that the best thing about the cybersecurity framework, in my opinion, was the fact that on the front cover it says that it's version 1.0, which means it's a product that's continuing to be worked on and advanced. As a matter of fact, industry is working with their government counterparts in the United States in further developing that cybersecurity framework, which is going to become more and more valuable, I believe. I mentioned yesterday that I thought regulation should be a last resort. That we shouldn't be out there searching for regulation, but we should try to develop the regulation, consider the regulation when it's needed. Frankly, regulation is very, very tough. It's tough to get everybody to buy into it, and if you're going to regulate somebody, you have to also consider the negative implications or changes in this rapidly evolving and innovative area of information technology. I thought that Mr. Kaspersky this morning had a very interesting statement, and you know, I kind of agree with it. It probably could be developed a little bit, but with a lack of time, you know, he said in his thought, regulation should not be considered or applied to consumer products, but it could be considered for critical infrastructure if that is to protect the critical infrastructure. Now, I think that's something to consider. He sort of put some things into context there very quickly with a sentence or two that I think are good for our consideration. The second major point I wanted to make, that one being on liability, the fact that I think we need to consider addressing that in our part of the report. But the second area is the fact that our panel yesterday was, the title of it was Developing a New Legal and Regulatory Paradigm for Security Intrusion. And we did not really address the legal aspects. We got into the regulatory, and even the title here on our paper says cyber regulation with no recognition of the legal aspects. What I wanted to mention there is that cyber law has become a big deal. And just as cyber insurance now has taken off, just within the last couple of years, cyber law is becoming very, very important. I'm working with a number of law firms. They have recognized that that is a specialty area, because cyber attorneys now that are going to be defending multi-million and perhaps billion-dollar lawsuits that are going to come, these attorneys are going to have to know the difference between what a botnet is and a spearfish. But they're going to be able to, they're going to need to be able to explain that to a judge or a jury that has no technical background, has no idea what a botnet and a spearfish is or what the difference is, because there's going to be millions of dollars worth of lawsuits here that are going to be in the hands of the judge and the jury to rule on this. So I think cyber law is also a big deal. Earlier this week, I was in Houston, and I spoke to at a World Energy Summit. And it was organized by a very large global law firm. So there were a lot of attorneys there. I frankly was a little surprised when, during my time at the podium, I asked how many of the attorneys in the audience were familiar that there was now established in August of this year a legal services information sharing analysis organization, I say. And so that was just established in August. And I had one hand in the audience that went up of about 400 people. And a lot of these folks were attorneys. Now, the legal area, this happened to be an energy conference, but you know, you're going to have, which this was oil and gas and electric power, but you're going to also have the financial institutions, although they use the financial services ISAC. But this is an area that's going to develop in the legal services aspects of how, how you share information and best practices among attorneys as this cyber area continues to develop. By the way, the annual fee to be a member of the legal services ISAO is $8,000, $8,000 US. So that's
about an hour of an attorney, right?
That's about right. I don't think anybody's going to have to not consider this kind of an opportunity at AK. I mean, to go in for $8,000, I think would be worth that investment. Let's see. The only other thing I wanted to mention, Chris, you talked about the Moscow-Washington hotline. Yes, in fact, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. President Kennedy and President Khrushchev in 1963 agreed to a Moscow-Washington hotline. It was teletype, but being director of an organization that was responsible for a number of years of continuing to upgrade that, it became very, very sophisticated. My point is that anything that's put in initially, if you continue to nurture it and work with the individuals on each end, even though it's not in the news, that improvements are made and the capabilities are there and they're still existing today. And I was very privileged in 2003 to represent the U.S. government, specifically the President and Secretary of Defense in Moscow, when we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Moscow-Washington hotline. So, but those improvements continued over the years, even with an initial good idea, and they're there today.
Thanks very much, Harry. John Foley, from a European point of view, do these issues and problems resonate?
Yes, very much indeed, Admiral, and thanks very much for grasping the essence of what we're discussing in the panel that I was a part of. We did go in many directions, and it showed also that some adjustments, let me say that, to the summary that we have gotten here needs to be somewhat exchanged, added some more information. I'd like to emphasize that we are coming from different parts of the world. Of course, we have different sets of rules, different kinds of cultures, and trying to have this all put into a melting pot and find a common solution, this will just not happen. But we may find some general aspects that we could highlight that maybe will help us to get on and further in this context. I'd like to remind you of what the Minister Amari said yesterday. He, as he presented the My Number system, showed that Japan will really be going down the road of compiling a lot of data, personal information. As an example, he talked about the Estonians' way of doing business. In Estonia, they have a card where everything is on it, from driver license to health security and so on and so forth. And as I understand Minister Amari, Japan will probably also be going down that road as well. And he also pointed out, or another speaker pointed out, that Estonia in 2007 was really attacked, and their systems went down, the national bank went down, and we even saw that people from Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, was walking around the town because they couldn't phone each other. They thought really that the Russians were coming once again. So we saw really a virtual attack or a cyber attack that really had an impact on physical world. So my point being here is that if we are compiling data, in Denmark we're something in between, I would say. Even in Europe, but please help me out here, Paco, if I'm wrong. He's really the European expert. But I've been working for many years now in something called the Network and Information Security Platform in the EU. And we deal with the legislation. And as I pointed out yesterday, I do it now from looking from the private side of it, which before I was really the legal advisor for writing laws and these things. So I'd like to mention that we should maybe look at the regulation also as a help for the civilians, for the citizens, and also for the government and private companies, that they should adhere to the threats out there. In Denmark, we have seen the last year many incidents, many of our institutions have been attacked. People's personal information and data are out there somewhere, even criminal registered, driver license information, and so on and so forth. So where to strike the balance? I think that you mentioned you pinpointed exactly what the problem is. What is the balance? On the one hand, we want security, we want government to help us, but on the other hand, we want a lot of freedom. I could never, please correct me if I'm wrong, I could never think about the Americans, the US, having a system like Estonia, where everything is on one card, because the culture here is different, very much different. And others are very more strict, much more rigid, and want to control maybe a bit more. And when you compile all this information, you also get a very sensitive system, a system that really can have an impact not only on each and every citizen, but also the nations. So I think we should maybe adjust a little bit.
Right. I think that's good. And I think I saw some wrong. What's that? Oh yeah, Jim was there too. But I want to follow up this European aspect because it was clear in the discussion yesterday that the European approach has more regulation. Does that give more security to the companies? Are European companies getting sued less? Are they worried about it as much as Harry, you said American companies are? Are they getting something for all this regulation?
I have the impression that we are taking things at the extreme. In terms of, it looks that we regulate for everything. Yesterday we spoke and we concentrated on issues of privacy. Privacy was related to fundamental rights. I mean, legislation in this area is necessary. It's like a good legislation related to the Constitution in the States. I think we all agree that there are fundamental rights that have to be protected. Is that against innovation? Is that too much regulation? I don't think so. I think I had the impression that there were much more things in common than in different. That's one thing. And the second thing is probably we have approached the debate in the first place analyzing where we agree and where we disagree. Probably the disagreement were not so too far away. That was my point. I think that it's a matter of where you put the border to say, okay, here is the point where we find a kind of a balance of our ideas, the way we approach in one place in the world, and I don't want to concentrate on the States. I mentioned the safe harbor, but that applies to any kind of regulation. So I am against a lot of regulation as well, but the basic regulation has to be there, and then it relates to the issue of data breaches and liability. Perhaps we made the mistake of opposing the security from the government point of view and the privacy. But I think the government and the citizens are on the same side with the cyber criminals. So if there is a breach and they benefit, I think the government should support them. So I think we were not so far away. And of course, if you don't do your due diligence, and you mentioned the issue, this is a very interesting issue. What are the companies are going to do? They are going to do the due diligence for you, and based on that, you will have to pay. You are well prepared, you pay less, like when you have this accident in your private license, your insurance is giving you bonuses. So the same thing those companies are going to do. So it's about preparedness, and it's about doing the right things, and then you will have much less liabilities. So, and finally, I don't think that regulation and innovation has to be opposed. You can do very good things that respect the regulation and at the same time getting innovation in place by design. The final thing is that when we were preparing the meeting, you mentioned something that is very meaningful. In your relationships with the judges, when you have to intervene from the intelligence services, etc. I think the principle should be there. Perhaps the implementation of the system is not good. So regulation might be very good, but the implementation might be bad. So let's tackle the implementation and not the legislation as such. So that's my recommendation. That's my statement on that.
No, thank you very, very much. Reinhard, you have something to add?
A little different. If what came out, to my view, and which was not reflected clearly in what is written and what is spoken out, is if we don't succeed to work cultural difference into the technology of the internet, we will have a very hard time to work cultural technology into regulation. That will not work. That means...
Say that one more time, please. I didn't understand it.
If we don't work the cultural difference into the technology, we can't work the cultural difference into regulation. Okay. Which means that we need, and I mentioned that now, and you might remember, we need something like a jurisdiction-aware communication, both in transit and in rest. Apart from that, we have to proceed on what has been mentioned in the fundamental rights, because we are largely an agreement and work on that. But perhaps we should separate these two.
That's good. Jim Penrose, you were also on the panel.
Thank you. I think it's come into focus for me that 3 different categories that you had mentioned earlier, where we've got laws, regulations that pertain to the human rights and civil liberties for data protection purposes. And I think Chris Inglis, you stated it really well yesterday, where you're going to hold those high ideals and put them under glass, and we're going to work for that, right? Period. Full stop. And that's got to be treated with its own level of respect. But at the same time, you're not going to come up with a grand unified theory for everything at once. You're thinking in terms of physics, right? It's very difficult. So let's look at the other component parts. So the other thing that I think Paco talked about yesterday was this concept of helping to protect the consumer and companies with best practices and the kinds of procedures that you would implement to show that you've done due diligence for cybersecurity, and to make sure that you're not going to essentially leave people vulnerable out there because from a competitive perspective, it's a first market sort of situation, and if people don't have to play by the same rules, you can cut a few corners here and there. You're going to come out with a vulnerability in your product, and it's going to be something that people can exploit and be used by the bad guys. So if you're going to level the playing field, it would be in that second category where you would outline, whether it's with a NIST framework style or some other kind of framework, what would the best practice look like and how you would comply. And then, of course, you talk about liability and who can sue who, in that kind of implementation. But that would be the second category, I would think about. And then the last category would be the one that I think you spent way too much time on yesterday, which would be the lawful processes associated with national security procedures, law enforcement, and cybersecurity data sharing. That's something that we obviously have to consider and figure out how you implement that in a way that respects our fundamental civil liberties and human rights that we talked about in the first category. But we know it's necessary, right? We're going to have to be able to do law enforcement activities and arrest criminals who are exploiting intellectual property that's not theirs, or using the internet in another way that would be deleterious. So that I think is the last category, and the one that probably is the stickiest one for people to understand and work with, because everybody's got a different opinion on what's a reasonable thing to go after in a law enforcement context or intelligence context, and what kind of data is in or out, and how it can be properly sanitized. But those are all implementation details that have to be dealt with at some point, but kind of in a simultaneous fashion, so that we don't essentially betray our own ideals of the process.
Thanks. Is Sato Yoshihiro here, who is also on the panel here? Oh, yeah. Some second thoughts after a day of good night's sleep?
So, first thing is that I think that international interoperability developing legal and regulation for cyber security is feasible, I think. So, but in that case, we need to distinguish between the privacy issue and the security issue. So, I mean that security issue can be interoperable within the world. So, it is one thing. So, for example, information security, the kind of rule over law or legal regulation of information security is analogy of rules of driving motor and vehicles. So in that case, as you know, almost countries have DMV rules. So what is different? So speed limit within the city is not the same in the world. However, as you know, we can have an international driver's license. So it can drive the mobile in the world. So it means that important thing is we do not need unify the maximum speed. So, but important thing is that we know there is a maximum speed in any country. So it is for international driver's license things. So it can be applied to the information security requirement or something like that. So, but privacy is, you said that it is based on human rights. So it is something other than driving motor and vehicle things. So because driving motors is not a human rights, so it is just a benefit of some transportation. So privacy is other than security. So and also US, EU safe harbor issue is I think it is a very rare case and exceptional case. So we do not take care much about its issue in the cybersecurity issue area. So I think. So it is my personal opinion. So I'm belonging to HP, but it is just personal opinion.
I think that's a great analogy. We have international driver's license, but not every country has exactly the same rules, and we don't try to make it that way. That's a nice way to think about it. We are running short of time, and let's see, Danielle has her hand up for a long time. I think she's going to be the last one, and then I'm going to...
I'll be quick. Great, thank you. So I'm Danielle Cruz. I'm a cybersecurity fellow at New America think tank from Washington, D.C. And I was in this session yesterday, and I think there are 2 points that really need to be teased out for capturing the session and thinking about this moving forward. I don't think they were explored enough yesterday. One of them is exactly what Sato-san said, so you must have read my mind. I think privacy and security are related, but they're distinct. And I think we're doing a disservice if we constantly talk about them together and should we regulate, not regulate. Takei-san captured it well in that there are a lot of cultural differences in privacy, but there aren't really ones in cybersecurity. I think we're very much on the same page in cybersecurity. I think more importantly, they really are distinct. I mean, privacy protecting data, you can lose data or companies can misuse data not related at all to cybersecurity. It just could be they collect the data and they use it in a way that you don't want. That's not a cybersecurity issue. At the same time, there's a lot more to cybersecurity than just personal data breaches. Mr. Kaspersky captured it this morning. There's cyber sabotage, there's espionage, there's stealing money. Most of that is not personal data. So I think that we need to talk about them differently. I think there's a lot of conversation right now about privacy and frameworks. I think we can add a lot more value as a global community focusing more on cybersecurity. My second point is that I think what's often missing from these discussions, and it's something I've pushed for more than a decade, is bringing the economic and innovation discussion into cybersecurity. And somebody yesterday said it's no longer the internet economy, the internet is the economy. So if everyone is relying on the internet, companies, governments, individuals, better cybersecurity brings us economic growth at the end of the day. So Takei-san asked some questions about, what are we trying to do with regulation? Are we trying to discuss how to protect the nation, to secure the internet, to protect the consumer? My question is, what about the fourth one? How are we using cybersecurity policy to promote economic growth? And I think we need more, as we have these discussions, and I've seen this mature in the United States over the last 10 years, where are the commercial and economic parts of the government in these discussions? The U.S. Commerce Department, the U.S. Trade Representative have become much more active in the interagency discussions about cybersecurity over the last 10 years. It's DOD and NSA and DHS have very valuable roles to play in cybersecurity, but so do the commercial actors. And I think that's why we see U.S. policies over the last couple of years have become much more focused on innovation, global approaches, and this framework is on risk management, so they're looking at it from the economic point of view. I think if we can look more at that as we move forward, we'll also be contributing a lot more to this discussion and just pushing about liability and that type of thing.
Thank you very much, Danielle. I'm going to have to cut it off here because I have to figure out what I'm going to say in half an hour. If you don't recognize what I say,
we'll let you know.
Then I would take your own impressions home, not what I tell you, because this was an extremely rich discussion, and I think most of you feel as I do that the value of these is not to communicate, but it's the interaction, the thinking you do along the way it affects your own ideas, and this was certainly certainly tremendous. So I'll do my best to represent all of your good ideas, and for me, it certainly won't be the last time that I see many of you, and I hope that's the same for all. Thank you very much.